Thank you for coming. And tonight we're going to talk about natural disasters in Seattle, caught between a rock and a hard place. And I guess you really can't on this video see the presentation, but the people in the room can see it. And try to tell you what slide number we're on so that those who get this later can keep up with us. I want to welcome you all and thank you for coming. And just want to acknowledge the guests here this evening. All nice, pretty smiles. And one special guest that we have tonight. This is the girlfriend of the E-Trade baby. How about a big hand of applause for the E-Trade baby? Yeah, here we go. She feels more comfortable with a device in her hands. So look at the smile when that happens, huh? Okay. So we're very privileged to have her with us tonight, and because we're going to be talking about some technical stuff here. And I want to start by showing you a picture of my brother's house in Seattle. My brother Paul lives right on, if you can, you probably can't see this at home, but this is the fault line of the Seattle fault, and he lives right on there. He bought his house a few years ago, and of course the person who sold it didn't tell him about that ahead of time. But he actually does live right on the fault line. Now, on the next slide here, we can see a picture of the Seattle fault zone. Right here is a picture, I don't know if you can see that over here, of exactly where my brother's house is, and the fault line is right underneath of it. And that's true. This is Seattle, and he lives right here. And so what I'm going to show you here is just the beginning of a video. This is an animated video created by the Washington Department of Transportation, and it shows. I don't have time to show you this whole thing, but it's a very good video that shows the what could potentially happen if that Seattle fault zone fractures. You can see in this video here that we have a quake of this magnitude 7 on the Richter scale. If that were to occur, there's a viaduct, which is similar to the viaduct that was in San Francisco that collapsed in upon itself when during the 1980 World Series, I believe it was, and killed quite a few people. This is also the waterfront area, and scientists believe that this would collapse and liquefy the land underneath that this is built on would go through a process of liquefaction during this earthquake. So you can see the earthquake occurs here, and the earth starts to move, and this is only within a few miles of my brother Paul's house in Seattle. And as we go through this, you'll see that the motion of the earth underneath of these human creations, it entirely starts to fall apart. So I'm not going to go through too much of that, but you can watch it on your own when I'm going to hand out packages for everyone. And I'm sorry you weren't looking at me during that. Okay? So give me a second here. We'll get to the next part of this. So we're going to move to slide number 5, which is the agenda for this evening's presentation. And we've already done the introduction. We're going to cover a little bit of the geological theory, the background theories involved with plate tectonics, just to begin with, just a short review. We're going to do present some of the evidence for the Seattle area, the Pacific Northwest region. and why that we're going to focus on that, and some of the folklore as well that has provides some backup from generations gone by, Native American and Japanese folklore. Plate tectonics is a theory that was originally presented by a meteorologist, believe it or not, named Alfred Wegener. He was a German meteorologist doing some research in the Arctic region. Died at a young age from overexposure during one of his expeditions up there, but he was the first to present the ideas of the continents drifting along plates in the around the Earth. Before that, geologists had no clue, didn't really think that that was possible. Entire continents moving across the face of the Earth. But in the during the Second World War, the U.S. Navy did some underwater surveying and found that there were large rifts areas, actually mountainous regions underwater, that turned out to be the expansion points for these tectonic plates. And so where the other ends of these expansion joints, the other ends of the plates, crash into one another. This is where the earthquakes occur, where volcanoes are formed, and we have the events that occur because of those are tsunami, liquefaction, and gas and fire in big cities. And in the volcanoes, we have pyroclastic flows, lahars, and flooding. That was slide 6, by the way. We move to slide 7, and we're pointing out first of all, the location of the Pacific Northwest, precisely where my brother's house is, for one, and for where the Juan de Fuca plate exists, and that is the plate of interest tonight. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the Earth's geological layers. You can view the Earth as a big molten blob in space whose outer shell has solidified. The top 5 to 31 miles of the Earth's crust has solidified into a crust, and that is the top layer where the plates themselves from plate tectonics rub up against one another and cause the continents that exist on top of them to move. But beneath that, the forces that cause this movement are actually the mantle, convectionary currents from deep in the mantle that cause the plates to move. And this is just a slide number 8, that shows the crustal subduction zones and spreading zones. The rifts that we were talking about are the spreading zones, and the crustal subduction zones are where the plate rubs up against each other and creates earthquakes. Now, we're specifically talking about the Juan de Fuca plate and in the Pacific Northwest, and the Gorda plates. Those are two plates that create this subduction, a subduction zone very similar to the zone that created the terrible tsunamis, earthquakes that caused the tsunamis in 2004 in Sumatra, Indonesia. These 250,000 people lost their lives in that event, and so what they've discovered in recent years, since 1995, a guy named Heinemann found evidence that this same type of subduction zone exists on the Juan de Fuca plate just off the coast in Seattle and the Northwest Corridor. And as we look at slide number 9, we can see precisely where this subduction zone is. This area where the two plates, the North American plate upon which Seattle exists, and the Juan de Fuca plate, which is spreading off the Pacific plate. And what they found is that this Juan de Fuca plate it locks up as it goes underneath of, subducts beneath the North American plate. And this uplift occurs, and it about every three to 600 years, it shifts. The Earth shifts, and that's where the earthquake occurs. And we can have some enormous. There's evidence of some enormous quakes that have occurred there. Now, my brother's house is right on top of the uplift, very near that, and when the rupturing occurs, it's not going to be a pretty sight. So we're going to move to slide number 11 here. The evidence, and this is through a collection of evidence that was collected by a R. Ludwin, research professor at the University of Washington, who put together a collection of evidence that was founded by archaeologists and anthropologists about the Native American, the old Native American folklore that points towards events that may have occurred some 300 years ago in 1700. That was the ghost forest in Oregon, and an entire forest that died, which is believed to have happened about 300 years ago due to the subsidence after this rupture of the Juan de Fuca fault line. Here's some more evidence. This is slide number 12, where we find evidence of about 12 or 13 of these events that have occurred over the past 7 events that have occurred over the past 3,500 years, which on average brings us to every 300 to 600 years, this plate shifts and causes these enormous megathrust earthquakes that create tsunamis. Now, Ludwin discovered, and this is just a picture of the from Google, actually a satellite picture that shows the underwater depiction of the quake, of the fault line itself, and where Seattle sits in relation to that. We can see the blue arrow, which indicates, and again, this is slide number 13. The blue arrow, which indicates my brother's house, and the red arrow, which indicates Mount Rainier. And we're going to start talking about volcanoes here. Sorry about the not too swift movement between earthquakes and volcanoes, but that's this is the caught between a rock and a hard place theme here, where we can see on one side the megathrust fault line, and on the other side a line of volcanoes called the Cascadia volcanoes, of which Mount Rainier is one. Now, you can see Mount Rainier from my brother's backyard. We can see that the cause of volcanoes is also, this line of volcanoes is caused by the subduction of the Juan de Fuca plate, in this case, beneath the North American plate. The friction that occurs is what causes this. Now, as those huge tectonic plates move against one another, the heat that builds up causes the molten rock to come up through fissures in the earth and create these volcanoes. Mount St. Helens was one. The eruption in 1984, I believe it was, or 1983, of Mount St. Helens is a direct result of the tectonic activity between the North American plate and the Juan de Fuca plate. Pyroclastic flows is another danger due to these volcanoes. When they outgas during an eruption, they shoot materials up to 7 to 8, 9 miles in the air, and that material comes back down in the form of a pyroclastic flow. Now, this next slide is actually a picture from my brother's backyard of Mount Rainier. So you can see that he's definitely caught between a rock and a hard place. What I was getting at here is from the USGS, the U.S. Geological Survey, we see that they rate volcanoes in the United States based on dangers, the threat level that occurs. If you look at the little red arrow here, Mount Rainier is in the very high threat level range, along with a number of others, including Mount St. Helens. This is due to a number of causes. Now, as you saw in the picture earlier, Mount Rainier is snow-covered. If there is a heating or an outgassing that occurs from that volcano, that snow melts and flooding occurs along its banks. Houses are built along the flanks of Mount Rainier. All this area, including Seattle, was developed before these theories were known. The tectonic plate theory is only about 50 years old. Seattle was built before that, and then millions of people that live in that region had no idea of this before they built their homes. This particular slide, slide 17, shows the lahars, ancient lahars, that have occurred due to the eruption of Mount Rainier. Geologists and archaeologists have dug up the layers of these, and these lahars, extremely dangerous mudslides that have covered many of the towns that are built on the side of Mount Rainier. These towns built, like I said, before they knew about these dangers. And these lahars actually go out as far as my brother's house in Seattle from Mount Rainier. Slide number 18 is Ludwin's evidence from Native folklore, Native American folklore, of the same thing. 300 years ago, the Klallam and Hakka Indians off the coast of on the coast of Washington and Oregon have stories of a thunderbird and a whale that they used, and what scientists now believe may help to describe one of the events, at least, that has occurred about 300 years ago. Actually, they know the exact date because of records in Japan that showed a tsunami that was generated from this megathrust earthquake along the Juan de Fuca fault line. And this created a tsunami in Japan all the way, thousands of miles across the Pacific Ocean. And Japan has two types of tsunamis. One is generated when there is an earthquake along their fault lines over there. This particular one that is written down in the record as being one that was generated when there was no shaking, no earth shaking. So it occurred on the 27th, early in the morning, on the 27th of January in 1700. There is evidence also that this megathrust quake occurred on the 26th, the evening of the 26th, which would have given it just enough time, the tsunami, to get over to Japan by early in the morning on the 27th. Very interesting collection of evidence and folklore that back up the story. So that's about it. We move into the conclusion here, and give me a second to prepare the San Andreas Fault part of this. We're going to wrap things up here with the San Andreas Fault because it's so famous. they're a lot like roads or car paths, even on a golf course. It's almost looks like you could drive down the middle of it. But we don't want to be building houses on there. And so the point of this whole thing was to show you that the Seattle fault is not a good place to build your house. Caught between Mount Rainier and a volcano that you can see from my brother's backyard, and the megathrust fault line on the other side of his house. Very bad place to be. So I want to thank you all for coming, and again, we're going to just show our audience here. Oops, we seem to have lost one. There we go. And wait a minute, I'm being handed a note here, a note that says read the rules. This is from the girlfriend. She's got a text message from her boyfriend. Read the rules, Shankoponymous. Don't build your house on the Seattle fault line. Well, thank you very much. And we have a special gift for our guest of honor over here. One free and clear for predicting how many pennies we put in the machine down at TD Bank. Thank you all for coming. And I appreciate all the time today you've put into this, my projects. Thanks again, and we'll see you later.